Hello and welcome to commentary for High Performance Imports V5, Part 1. In this part we're heading to the Ebisu Drift Matsuri, a very well-known drift festival which they hold at Ebisu, which is in Nihon Matsu, just south of Fukushima.
This is Ebisu, a motorsport complex in the Fukushima prefecture of Japan. There are 7 tracks here, most of which were built specifically for drifting, so their annual drift festival is a big event. This track is known as the school course. The tight, winding corners keep speed down, so it is a safe place to practice drift techniques. The idea is that even if you do hit the wall, you can still drive home. It all seems a bit foolish until you see it done well. Once you reach this level of skill, it's time to try the Minami course.
I actually got it right. That is the Minami course. With Ebisu, I always forget which one's Minami, Higashi, and so on. There are 3, arguably 4 sort of major racetracks in Ebisu, and Minami is the one that they usually used for D1 events.
This is the pro drift circuit. Like the school course, it is very winding, but the corner speeds are much higher, so it is harder to avoid spinning. The consequences of a mistake are also much worse. This guy belongs to a club called Six Pistons. Their motto is rolling and beer. Time for the beer.
I met these guys actually. They one of them came up to me in the pits and asked me if I liked beer. I said, "Of course I do. I'm Australian." So had a beer with them, and they had a bunch of cool stickers. And basically, they used the letters RB from RB Engine and came up with the idea of rolling in beer as their club motto. You can kind of see why C33 Laurel's pretty thin on the ground now. They were a really cheap option for drifting, really much cheaper than a Skyline. But you got the reliable RB20 engine combined with the S13 strut style suspension in the front. So all S13 coilovers were bolt in. I had a look at the car later, and they did indeed have S13 coilovers in the front. I asked them what brand they were. They said junk. He said he'd bought them for $100. Goes to show, though, you could really have fun on a budget back then. This was a couple of years before famous D1 driver Hibino Tetsuya got famous for jumping his car over this corner just before the pit straight. After that, a lot of other D1 drivers also started doing it. It was just a really spectacular way to enter the straight. Got the judges' attention, and I imagine it'd let you go faster into the corner too.
By far the best presented car at the meeting was this S15 Silvia with the new Vertex Ridge wide body kit. This is the demo car for Japanese suspension and exhaust specialist JIC. They use it to compete in the famous D1 Drift Series. Tomei are a major sponsor. They supplied the rebuilt SR20 engine, which has Tomei pistons and camshafts. There was also a spare Tomei engine in JIC's support truck. The turbo is a high-flow Tomei item, mounted on JIC's own exhaust manifold with custom piping to an ARC intercooler. JIC sum up their enthusiasm in a somewhat baffling mission statement.
Challenge spirits is forever. We will doing outmost best for the best. Can't even read the last bit. Yeah, that's pretty classic Japanese.
The most important aspect of any drift car is the suspension. JIC constructed a one-off rear cradle for the S15. That's the big blue thing. All of the suspension links are adjustable, with mostly solid bushes.
This was still early days relief in D1, but you were just starting to see custom cradles like that one, in addition to all the usual adjustable arms you can see there. They hadn't gone quite as far yet with the lock at the front, so they didn't have this huge amount of opposite lock you could use, which in my mind meant you had to be a bit more skilled driver not to spin.
Even the sway bars use pillow ball joints. There are carbon fibre strut braces front and rear, with JIC's premium Corla shocks and brake calipers from a Ferrari F50.
Seems a really unnecessary upgrade, that. Even now, most drift cars tend to run the original brakes just with better pads. The trouble with having a really big caliper and disc is you never really get it up to temperature because you're just not going that fast and you're not doing really hard stopping.
The lightweight rims are 18 inches front and rear. So, time to change our socks and go for a ride.
I did this video with the camera mounted on a tripod and strapped down into the back. I think I even taped it in. Was the only way I could get a good position to get this video. Unfortunately, I think the roll cage was in the way, so I couldn't use my normal window mount. But it actually turned out quite well having that central position.
Drifting is not a race, but sometimes you have to pass if you want to go faster.
Unfortunately, I don't remember this driver's name. If you know, please put it in the comments below. You notice when he wasn't following someone, he didn't have to use the handbrake at all. It was just all done with steering and throttle control. These guys didn't even bother drifting that top couple of corners. They took it more as a chance to let their tyres cool down, but he just drifted the whole thing usually.
So, you've seen the best presented car at the meeting, now for one of the worst. This 180SX has had a very hard life indeed, but it is still quite an effective drift car.
It's awesome. You don't tend to see drift cars in quite this bad condition anymore. But at the time, S13s were a pretty cheap car, so people didn't care too much about the damage and didn't bother fixing them when they were in bad shape. They just get another shell.
The bonnet venting is a case of lateral thinking, much like the headlight conversion.
It's Shino. Look how young she is. Most drifters in Australia would be familiar with Shino and her drifting exploits. She was actually the first female drift champion in Australia, which you'll see in a later video.
The rear hatch is only secured by gaffer tape. Luckily, they aren't strict about scrutineering at these events. Interior detailing isn't exactly the main priority either. Though his budget is obviously in a different league, there's nothing wrong with this driver's technique.
of the air fresheners flapping around in the breeze. You might notice his gear knob is actually a snap-on screwdriver handle, which was kind of a popular thing back then.
All this guy needs to reach D1 is a new car and some new tyres.
Yeah, it's a pretty standard way for a tyre to fail when you're drifting. Delamination. I just remember this is actually the first time that I met Shino. She already had her own drift workshop back then, which is in Saitama, and she's still running it today. Back then, it was pretty unusual to see a gaijin at a Japanese drift meeting. So Shino walked straight up to me in the usual manner and started asking me a whole lot of questions because even back then she spoke pretty reasonable English, and she was very helpful, of course, letting me put the camera in this car.
The next day we saw some D1 cars practicing for the Ebisu event. The difference in speed is fairly obvious. The Blitz R34 Skyline sedan is driven by Nomican from Urus. Top Secret were also testing their new S15, which has their latest wide body kit.
The car actually got pranked really badly at the D1 event the next day.
The pro drivers get ridiculously close to the wall. Unfortunately, light drizzle was making the track a bit unpredictable. This S14 Silvergear uses a Toyota 1JZ single turbo engine, which gives a wider torque band than the SR20. It was putting on a good show until the rain suddenly got heavier.
It's Izumida driving there, Izumida Yuki. He was a D1 driver then, and he was for many, many years. He came out to Australia a couple of times too to drift events. This was probably one of his more famous cars, the 1JZ engined S14. He drove it for quite a few years. He did fix it after this. In fact, he did drive the next day in the D1 event despite all the damage. He just had a standard black bumper on it for the event.
You might expect them to call off the practice, but it doesn't work that way in Japan.
can tell by the damage on those cars, they'd already hit the wall a few times there. It was amazing how they just kept practicing even though it was raining. And the next day it wasn't raining, so there was really not much advantage to continuing on. But this is what they do. If you've got track time, you use it.
Soon the rain was so heavy that we had to move inside, but the drivers just kept on going.
Impressive near miss, that one. Uh, the good news is Ebisu circuit is still around. Unfortunately, this track, the Minami circuit, I'm not sure how long ago, but it's been turned into a rally circuit now. It was used for D1 events for a fair while after this, but yeah, a few years ago, I guess they decided it was getting a bit too dangerous, so they turned it into a dirt track instead. Anyway, that's it for part one of High Performance Imports of V5. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, and I'll be back with part two soon. Cheers.